My dearest listener, come closer. Let the fires glow and the whisper of the wind outside be the only other sounds as I tell you a story. A story not just of blood and shadows, but of a love so profound it refused to be extinguished by death itself. This is not the tale you think you know. This is the story of Eva Harker, and of the cursed immortal whose soul was bound to hers long before either of them drew breath in this lifetime. This is the story of how I remember it all. Friends, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new audiobook, and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you in advance. The mist in the Carpathians was not like other mists. It was a living entity, a breath exhaled from the very stone of the mountains, thick with the scent of pine and cold, wet earth. It swallowed sound, it blurred vision, and it whispered secrets in a language only the soul could understand. For Eva Harker, bundled in the passenger seat of a rattling old truck, it felt less like a journey and more like a homecoming to a place she had never been. She watched the ancient forests slide by, a tapestry of gnarled oak and spear-like pines, their branches laden with a silence that felt watchful. Her fingers, chilled despite her gloves, traced the cover of her journal. It was filled with notes, sketches of archaic symbols, and transcripts of village elders speaking in hushed, reverent tones of the Strigoi, the ancient bloodline she had come to study. A bloodline rumored to hold the secret to healing any wound, to curing any sickness. To the academic world, it was a fool's errand, a myth. But to Eva, it was a siren's call she had heard in her dreams for years. Dreams of a castle, stark and magnificent, perched on a mountain peak like a dagger thrust into the sky. Dreams of a man with eyes that held the weight of centuries, and a voice that spoke her name not as a sound, but as a feeling, a resonance in her very blood. "The castle," she said, her voice soft but cutting through the driver's quiet grumbling. "It's close, isn't it?" The old man, a local hired to bring her this far, merely grunted, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Castel Louis Dracul. The Dragon's Castle. No one goes there, Domnisora. The road, it does not wish to be traveled. Eva didn't answer. She could feel it now, a pull deep in her sternum, a taut cord of destiny drawing her in. The truck ground to a halt at the end of a path that was little more than a scar in the earth, swallowed by the mist ahead. "This is as far as I go," he said, his eyes avoiding hers. "The rest is on foot. If you are wise, you will turn back with me now." But wisdom had abandoned her the moment she'd first seen the castle in her sleep. Paying him from her limited funds, she shouldered her heavy pack and stepped out into the biting air. The cold was a shock, clean and sharp. The truck's engine coughed, then faded as it reversed, leaving her in an immense, suffocating silence. She was truly alone. The path upward was treacherous, a ribbon of slick stone and exposed roots. The mist coiled around her ankles, as if trying to hold her back, or perhaps to guide her. With every step, the air grew thinner, colder. The only sounds were the crunch of her boots, the ragged pull of her own breath, and the frantic, hopeful beat of her heart. And then, the trees parted. There it was. Not a ruin, not a crumbling relic, but a fortress of breathtaking, terrible beauty. Castel Louis Dracul. It rose from the mountain's shoulder, all sharp angles and defiant towers, its dark stone weeping with moss and history. It was a place out of time, a symphony of Gothic arches and impossibly high windows that reflected nothing but the shifting gray of the fog. It should have felt menacing, a predator lying in wait. And yet, to Eva, it felt sorrowful. A great, wounded beast, holding its pain within walls of ancient rock. The massive iron-banded gate was before her, taller than 3 men. It looked impenetrable, final. As she reached out a trembling hand, her skin prickling with an energy that hummed in the very air, the right side of the gate groaned inward, just enough to admit a single person. An invitation. Or a trap. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she slipped through the gap, into the outer courtyard. It was a vast expanse of cracked flagstones, dominated by a dead, stone fountain. Silence reigned, a thick, velvet hush that pressed against her eardrums. The air inside the walls was different, still cold, but laced with a faint, haunting aroma of old incense, dust, and something else, something metallic and sweet. Blood. She followed the inner path to a second, smaller door of dark, aged oak. It swung open without a sound before she could even touch it. The interior of the castle stole the breath from her lungs. It was a cavern of shadows and flickering light. A grand hall stretched away into darkness, its vaulted ceiling lost in gloom. Massive tapestries, their colors faded to ghosts, depicted scenes of dragons and battles and forgotten kings. The floor was a chessboard of polished onyx and white marble, and along the walls, torches and iron sconces burned with a low, steady flame, their light catching on the motes of dust dancing in the air like forgotten spirits. The air thrummed with a latent power, a vibration that seeped into her bones. And at the far end of the hall, on a dais, stood a throne-like chair. It was empty. "You are the scholar." The voice was not loud. It was a low, resonant baritone that seemed not to travel through the air, but to form directly in the space around her, vibrating in the marrow of her bones. It was the voice from her dreams. She turned slowly, her pulse a wild, fluttering thing in her throat. He emerged from the shadows of a pillar, and the world narrowed to the space between them. He was tall, impossibly so, his form clad in simple, dark clothing that spoke of another era, a black tunic, trousers that hugged long, powerful legs, and boots soft-soled and silent on the stone. His hair was the color of raven's wings, swept back from a face that was both angelic and severe. High cheekbones, a strong jawline that seemed carved from marble, and a mouth that was a solemn, beautiful line. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were not the eyes of a man. They were the color of a stormy twilight, a deep, piercing gray that swirled with flecks of silver, and in their depths lay an agony so ancient, so profound, that Eva felt her own heart crack in sympathy. He was beautiful, in the way a fallen angel is beautiful, terrifying and utterly captivating. "I am Eva Harker," she managed, her voice a whisper. I wrote about my research." He took a step closer, and the candlelight seemed to shy away from him. "I received your letters." His gaze was a physical weight, traveling over her face, her wind-tousled hair, her practical, travel-worn clothes, as if seeing a ghost. "You should not have come." "Why?" she asked, emboldened by a courage she didn't feel. "Are the stories true? Does your bloodline hold the power to heal?" A bitter, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It did not reach his eyes. Heal? He let out a soft breath that was not quite a laugh. It is a curse, Eva Harker. A chain that binds the soul to a world it longs to leave. There is no healing here. Only an endless, slow decay. He moved again, a predator's grace that was both mesmerizing and unsettling. He circled her, not touching, but his presence was a cool pressure against her skin. You dream of this place. It was not a question. She stared at him, her research, her logic, her entire worldview crumbling to ash. How could you know that? He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could feel the unnatural coolness radiating from his body, could smell the scent of him, frost and old leather and that faint, tantalizing metallic sweetness. Because I dream of you, he whispered, his voice dropping to a timbre that was meant for her alone, a secret shared in the dark. I have dreamed of you for 100 years. His words should have terrified her. They should have sent her running back into the mist, screaming. Instead, they settled into a hollow place inside her she had never known was empty, filling it with a terrifying, perfect sense of rightness. This was why she had come. This was the pull, the call, the answer to the question her soul had been asking its whole life. Who are you? She breathed, her world reduced to the storm in his eyes. He looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, the millennia of pain in his gaze were joined by a spark of something else, a desperate, impossible hope. My name is Rael, he said, the name a caress, a prayer. Rael Dracul. And you, Eva, you are the echo of a life I was forced to leave behind. You are the memory I was made to forget. He turned then, his long coat whispering against the stone floor, and gestured for her to follow him deeper into the heart of the castle, into the shadows and the silence. And without a moment's hesitation, her fate sealed with a single, whispered confession, Eva Harker followed. The silence that followed Rael's confession was a living thing, thick and heavy with the weight of centuries. He led her from the grand hall into a labyrinth of corridors, each one darker, more intimate than the last. The air grew colder, the scent of old stone and dust more potent. Their footsteps were the only sound, his a near-silent whisper, hers a clumsy, human echo that seemed to offend the profound quiet of the place. He did not speak, and Eva, her mind reeling, did not dare break the spell. She followed the broad, dark line of his back, her eyes tracing the powerful set of his shoulders, the way the sparse torchlight gleamed on the raven's wing of his hair. I have dreamed of you for 100 years. The words looped in her mind, a maddening, beautiful melody. Was this why the local folklore warned of the Strigoi? Not because they were monsters, but because they were haunted? Cursed with memories of loves lost to time? They entered a long gallery. Here, the walls were not bare stone, but covered in paintings, their varnish cracked and darkened with age. Portraits of men and women with fierce, proud faces and eyes that held the same stormy gray as Rael's. They were all dark-haired, all pale, all possessing a terrible, severe beauty. A dynasty of sorrow. Rael paused before the largest portrait, a life-size depiction of a man in armor, a dragon emblazoned on his breastplate. His hand rested on the hilt of a sword, his expression one of grim defiance. It was Rael. There was no doubt. The same face, the same eyes, though in the painting they blazed with a fire that had since been banked to embers. My father, Rael said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Vladimir Dracul. the last voivode to rule these mountains before the world forgot our name." Eva stared at the painted face, at the unyielding strength in its lines. "He looks formidable." "He was a fool," Rael replied, the words cutting through the air like a shard of ice. "He believed power could be bargained for. That pax made in shadow could be broken in the light." He turned his head, his stormy gaze pinning her. "He learned the price of such arrogance. We all did." He moved on, and she hurried to keep pace. They passed doorways that led into rooms shrouded in dust sheets, their shapes ghostly and forlorn. A library with shelves that reached into the darkness, crammed with books bound in leather and what looked like human skin. A music room where a grand piano sat, its keys yellowed and silent. It was a museum of a life interrupted, a kingdom frozen in time. Finally, he led her into a smaller, circular chamber. A fire crackled in a great hearth of carved black stone, its warmth a welcome shock to her system. The room was a study, or perhaps a solar. Books and scrolls were piled on a large oak table, and two high-backed chairs upholstered in faded crimson velvet were drawn near the flames. The only other illumination came from a single, massive candle on the mantelpiece, its flame dancing and throwing long, wavering shadows against the walls. "You will stay here tonight," Rael said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The mountains are treacherous after dark. For more reasons than the cliffs." "You live here alone?" Eva asked, shrugging off her pack and letting it fall to the floor with a thud. She moved towards the fire, holding her numb fingers out to the heat. "There is no one else," he said simply. He stood by the fireplace, one arm braced on the mantel, his profile etched in fire and shadow. He looked like a king from a forgotten age, ruling a kingdom of dust and echoes. The servants left, or were lost. Time is a relentless hunter, Miss Harker. It picks off everything, eventually. "Eva," she corrected softly, turning to face him. "Please, call me Eva." His eyes met hers over the flickering light, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, as if trying to memorize every line of her face, to reconcile the woman before him with the phantom in his dreams. "Eva," he repeated, and her name on his lips was a different thing entirely. It was a key turning in a lock, a secret acknowledged. He pushed away from the mantel, and the space between them suddenly felt charged, electric. "You asked if the stories were true. About the blood." She nodded, her throat dry. He moved with that preternatural speed, stopping just before her. He was so close she could see the individual silver flecks in his gray irises, could see the impossible smoothness of his pale skin, unlined by the passage of the years he claimed to have lived. "Let me show you," he whispered. He did not reach for a knife. Instead, he simply raised his hand, palm up. With the nail of his other thumb, he made a swift, precise cut across his own palm. Eva gasped, expecting a well of crimson. But the line remained pale for a heartbeat, then slowly, dark blood welled up, thick and slow as syrup. But it was the scent that overwhelmed her. Not the coppery tang of human blood, but that same metallic sweetness that perfumed the castle air, now concentrated, intoxicating. It called to something primal deep within her, a hunger she never knew she possessed. Before her eyes, the cut began to close. The skin knitted itself back together, seamless and perfect, leaving behind only a faint, silvery smear that quickly faded. In less than 10 seconds, it was as if the wound had never been. Eva stared, her scientific mind scrambling for an explanation, finding none. How? The curse, he said, his voice low and haunted. A gift of healing, they call it. But it is a healing that comes at a cost. The body cannot die. It cannot age. It is trapped, a perfect, unchanging vessel for a soul that is slowly being eroded by the endless march of years. He curled his healed hand into a fist. This blood can heal the wounds of others, yes. A single drop can mend a broken bone, purge a sickness. But to take it, to drink it, is to bind yourself to the curse. To become like me. He looked at her then, his gaze so full of a raw, aching loneliness that it was a physical pain in her own chest. That is the truth of my bloodline, Eva. Not a gift, but a poison. A beautiful, eternal prison. The reality of it crashed down upon her. The myths, the rumors of healing, they were all true, but they were a palatable lie covering a horrific truth. This man, this beautiful, sorrowful creature, was not a guardian of a miraculous secret. He was its warden, and its most tragic inmate. How long, she breathed, her heart aching for him. 472 years, he answered without hesitation, the number a tombstone. I was 28 when my father's pact sealed my fate. I have watched empires rise and fall. I have seen languages born and forgotten. I have loved, his voice broke, the first crack in his granite composure. He looked away, into the fire. I have loved, and I have lost, again and again. Because mortality is a fragile, fleeting thing. And I am not. Tears she didn't know she had been holding back welled in Eva's eyes. The sheer, staggering weight of his existence was incomprehensible. The loneliness of it was a vast, cold ocean, and he was drowning in it. Without thinking, driven by an impulse that came from a place deeper than pity or fear, she reached out. Her fingers, still warm from the fire, brushed against his clenched fist. The contact was like a spark on dry tinder. A jolt, violent and sweet, shot up her arm, straight to her heart. It was not static electricity. It was a recognition. A memory of touch, a familiarity so profound it stole the air from her lungs. She saw his eyes widen, the storm in them swirling into a hurricane of shock and something akin to terror. And in that single, fleeting touch, a cascade of images flashed behind her eyes, too fast to comprehend, but leaving behind an echo of emotion, a woman's laughter in a sun-drenched field, the crushing grip of cold iron, the taste of salt tears, and the searing, final pain of a betrayal. She snatched her hand back, stumbling a step away, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. What was that? Rael was staring at her as if she were a ghost made flesh. His composure had shattered completely, leaving behind a raw, vulnerable man. You felt it, he whispered, his voice ragged. The bond. It is still there. What bond? Eva demanded, her own voice trembling. He took a step toward her, his gaze burning with a new, fierce light. The bond that defied death itself. The reason you dream of this place. The reason I dream of you. He was close again, his presence enveloping her. You are not just a scholar, Eva. You are a reclamation. A soul returned. He lifted a hand, his fingers hovering just inches from her cheek, not touching, but she could feel the cool energy of his skin. Your name, in my time, was Alina. You were a healer from a village in the valley. And you were everything. The name landed like a physical blow. Alina. It resonated in the deepest part of her, a chord struck true. It felt right. You loved her, Eva whispered, the words tasting of a truth she already knew. The firelight caught the unshed tears in his own eyes. I loved you, he corrected, his voice breaking on the word. And I watched you die. I held you as the light left your eyes, and I was powerless to save you. My blood, my cursed, healing blood, it was too late. The confession hung in the air between them, a shared, centuries-old grief. The castle, with all its shadows and secrets, seemed to hold its breath. The fear Eva had felt was gone, replaced by a devastating, all-consuming empathy. She was standing before a man who had loved so deeply, the universe had literally brought her back to him. Or a version of her. He finally let his hand fall, the moment of raw intensity passing. The shudders came down over his expression, the mask of the weary immortal slipping back into place. It is late. You should rest. The room through that archway is prepared for you. He gestured to a dark opening in the wall. No harm will come to you within these walls. You have my word. He turned and walked to the door, pausing on the threshold without looking back. The past is a ghost, Eva Harker. Do not be too quick to invite it in. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. And then he was gone, melting into the darkness of the corridor, leaving her alone in the flickering firelight with the echo of a love story that had ended in tragedy centuries before she was born, and the terrifying, thrilling certainty that it was not over. It was only just beginning. Sleep was an impossible country. Eva lay in the vast, canopied bed, its velvet hangings feeling less like comfort and more like the walls of a tomb. The fire in the hearth of her chamber had dwindled to embers, painting the room in pulses of faint, orange light. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. Rael. Not as he was now, a monument of sorrow and stone, but as he might have been in the painting, vital, fierce, his eyes alight with life, not the slow-burning agony of eternity. And she saw a woman with her own face, but with laughter lines around her eyes and sun-kissed skin. Alina. The name was a whisper in the dark, a key that fit a lock she hadn't known existed within her soul. The pull was no longer a vague feeling in her sternum. It was a physical ache, a yearning that drew her from the bed. The cold stone beneath her bare feet was a shock, but she barely felt it. Wrapping a thick, woolen blanket around her shoulders, she drifted from her room, back into the silent, watchful heart of the castle. She didn't have to search for long. She found him where she somehow knew he would be, in the library. He was not reading. He stood before a tall, arched window, his back to her, staring out at the tumultuous night. A storm had gathered, lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the jagged peaks of the mountains for brief, brilliant moments, casting his long, lonely shadow across the endless rows of books. He did not turn as she entered, but she knew he was aware of her. The very air shifted when she was near him, charged with the energy of their bond. You should be resting, he said, his voice low, absorbed by the vast, silent space. I can't, she replied, her own voice small in the immense room. She moved to stand a few feet from him, following his gaze out into the storm. The past you spoke of, it doesn't feel like the past. It feels like a room in a house I've just walked into, but all the furniture is covered in sheets. I can see the shapes. I know it's familiar. I just can't see it clearly. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the distant rumble of thunder. When he finally spoke, his words were measured, heavy with the weight of memory. What do you want to know, Eva? Everything. The word was a plea. He turned then, his face illuminated by another flash of lightning. The centuries were in his eyes, not as lines on his skin, but as a bottomless well of sorrow. The truth is not a gentle thing. I'm not asking for gentle, she whispered. I'm asking for truth. He studied her face, his gaze a tangible caress. Then, he gestured to a pair of worn leather armchairs near the cold fireplace. He did not sit, but paced before the hearth, a caged predator recounting the story of its cage. My father, Vladimir, was a man of immense pride and dwindling power, he began, his voice taking on the cadence of an old, oft-recited tale. The empire was encroaching, his allies were turning. He was desperate. And desperation is a key that unlocks terrible doors. He stopped, his eyes finding hers in the gloom. He sought out the Varkalak. A being of ancient, primordial power that dwelled in the heart of the mountain. Not a man, not a wolf, but something other. Eva pulled the blanket tighter, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature seeping into her bones. The Varkalak offered him a pact. A bloodline of warriors who could not be killed in battle. Who could lead their armies to victory, unafraid of death. Immortality, and the power to heal, passed from father to son. In return, the Dracul line would serve as guardians, keeping the old ways, the old magic, alive in a world that was forgetting it. My father, in his arrogance, agreed. He did not understand the fine print of a demon's bargain. Rael's jaw tightened. The immortality was granted. The healing blood flowed in our veins. But the Varkalak's gift was a poison. We were not simply made immortal. We were made other. The sun became an agony. The warmth of a human life became a taunt. We craved not food, but the vital essence that sustained life itself. Blood. The very thing that now healed us, also defined our existence. We were not rulers, we were monsters, hiding in the shadows of our own castle. He paused, and the pain on his face was so raw Eva had to look away. I was the first son. The first to inherit the gift. I fought it. I tried to live as a man. I wrote out, I ruled, I tried to find a cure. And that is when I found you. Alina. He said the name with such devastating tenderness that Eva's heart clenched. You were not of noble blood. You were a village healer, with hands that could mend a bird's broken wing and a spirit that could calm a storm. You were not afraid of me. You saw the man, not the monster. A ghost of a smile, beautiful and broken, touched his lips. You would bring me herbs, trying to find something, anything, that would ease the constant, gnawing hunger. You would sit with me in this very library, and for a few hours, the curse did not exist. There was only you, and me, and the quiet. The memory was so vivid in his voice that Eva could almost smell the dried herbs, see the flickering candlelight on a younger, less tortured version of his face. We married in secret, he continued, his voice dropping. My father was furious. He said I had defiled the bloodline. That immortal was a weakness. He was right, but not in the way he thought. The storm outside seemed to grow fiercer, as if feeding on his anguish. There were others. Fanatics who saw our kind as an abomination. Hunters. They learned of you. They knew you were my heart. And so, they laid a trap. He stopped his pacing, his back to her, his shoulders rigid. They took you from the village. They brought you to the cliffs at the edge of the estate. They sent word. I was to come alone, to surrender myself for a righteous execution, or they would throw you from the heights. Eva's hand flew to her mouth, a silent sob catching in her throat. She could see it. The wind tearing at a simple dress, the terror on a face that was her own. I went, of course, he said, as if there had ever been any other choice. I would have burned the world to ash for you. But they were clever. They had arrows tipped with silver, forged in a sacred fire. It neutralizes our healing. A wound from such a weapon can be mortal. He turned, and his eyes were pools of liquid silver in the dark, filled with a guilt that had festered for centuries. I fought. I killed many. But one of them, he loosed an arrow. You saw it. You pushed me out of the way. The air left Eva's lungs. She could feel it, the blinding, instinctual shove, the searing, hot-cold pain as the arrow meant for him found its home in her own body instead. I caught you as you fell, Rael whispered, his voice cracking. I was covered in the blood of my enemies, but your blood, yours was the only thing that mattered. I tried to give you my blood, to force you to drink, to turn you, to save you. But you were too far gone. You looked at me, you smiled that damnably brave smile, and you told me to live. You made me promise. A single, black tear traced a path down his marble cheek. And then you were gone. The only light in my eternal darkness, extinguished. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the mournful howl of the wind outside. Eva was crying, the tears hot and silent. She wasn't crying for a story. She was crying for a memory. Her memory. The hunters fled, Rael finished, his energy spent. My father found me there, holding your lifeless body. He said it was for the best. That love was a distraction we could not afford. In my grief and rage, I renounced him. I renounced my title, my name. I retreated here, into this castle, into the silence. I have been here ever since. A guardian of nothing. A king of dust. Waiting for a death that will not come. He finally sank into the chair opposite her, the weight of his story bowing his formidable frame. And now, you are here. A scholar from a land I have never seen, with her face, her spirit, her soul looking out at me through new eyes. He looked at her, utterly lost. I do not know if you are a miracle or a fresh form of torture sent to punish me for my failures. Eva stood, the blanket falling away. She crossed the space between them and knelt before his chair, her tear-streaked face tilted up to his. She didn't know what she was, either. A reincarnation? An echo? It didn't matter. The love she felt in that moment, a love born of shared memory and profound, soul-deep connection, was the most real thing she had ever known. You didn't fail her, Eva said, her voice firm despite her tears. She reached out, and this time, she did not flinch away. She laid her palm against his cold cheek. You loved her. And she loved you enough to sacrifice everything. He shuddered at her touch, his eyes closing as if in prayer. He leaned into her hand, a starving man offered a single drop of water. I'm not her, Eva whispered, the truth of it settling in her soul. I'm Eva. I have her memories, her love for you, but I am my own person. And I am not afraid of your curse, Rael. I am only afraid of leaving you alone in it again. His eyes opened, and the storm in them had quieted, replaced by a dawning, terrified wonder. For the first time in 400 years, the endless, crushing weight of his eternity felt, for a single, breathless moment, not like a sentence, but like a possibility. The confession of his curse did not break the spell between them, it forged it in iron and fire. The days that followed were a strange, suspended reality, a pocket of time outside of time. The castle was no longer a mausoleum of sorrow, but a labyrinth of rediscovery. Eva was no longer a guest, but a part of its ancient, beating heart. She followed Rael everywhere, a silent shadow slowly learning to walk in step with the Immortal. He showed her the secrets of Castle Louis Dracul, the hidden passages that sighed with draughts of forgotten air, the observatory at the highest tower where the stars burned with a cold, clear fire, the conservatory where strange, night-blooming flowers opened their petals only in the moonlight, releasing a fragrance that was both intoxicating and funereal. He began to teach her. Not just the history of his bloodline, etched in pain, but the reality of it. The constant, low hum of hunger that was his companion. The way his senses were both a gift and a torment, he could hear the heartbeat of a fox a mile away, smell the fear on a man long before he saw him. He showed her how he moved, with a speed that defied physics, a blur in the periphery of her vision. And Eva, the researcher, absorbed it all. But her curiosity was no longer academic. It was personal. It was a desperate need to understand the man she was, what? Falling in love with? The word was too small, too modern for the vast, ancient feeling that was consuming her. It was a recognition. A homecoming. The temptation was not one of mere flesh, though that was a fire burning steadily in her veins. It was the temptation of his darkness, the seductive pull of his eternity. One evening, they were in the grand hall. Rael had, for the first time in her presence, begun to practice with an ancient, heavy longsword he took from the wall. It was a dance of lethal beauty. The blade was a silver arc in the torchlight, his body a study in controlled power and impossible grace. He moved through the forms, a whirlwind of shadow and steel, the air singing as the sword cut through it. Eva watched from the foot of the dais, her breath caught in her throat. This was the warrior prime, the son of the dragon, not the weary scholar king. This was the man Alina had loved. The raw, masculine power of him was overwhelming, a primal call that resonated in the most ancient part of her brain. He finished with a final, sweeping strike that would have cleaved a man in two, and then stood perfectly still, his chest barely moving, the tip of the sword resting on the stone floor. His eyes found hers, burning with a fierce, unchecked intensity. "You see," he said, his voice a low thrum that vibrated in the hollow of her bones. "This is what I am, Eva. Not a tragic poet, not a brooding lord. I am a weapon, forged in blood and curse. This is the reality you flirt with when you look at me with such tenderness." She did not look away. She rose and walked towards him, each step a deliberate act of defiance against the fear he was trying to project. She stopped just before the point of the sword. "I'm not flirting, Rael," she said, her voice steady. His gaze dropped to the blade between them, a symbol of his violent nature, then back to her face. "You should be." He dropped the sword. It clattered on the stone, a discordant, shocking sound in the silent hall. In the space of a heartbeat, he was before her, his hands coming up to frame her face. His touch was cool, but it sent a wave of heat through her entire body. "This hunger," he whispered, his thumbs stroking her temples, his stormy eyes searching hers, desperate and dangerous. "It is not just for blood. It is for life. For warmth. For the scent of your skin, the sound of your pulse. It is a madness, Eva. And you are pouring gasoline on it." Her own heart was hammering, a frantic, living drumbeat against the cage of her ribs. She could feel the tension in him, the monumental effort of his control. The temptation to close that final inch, to press her lips to his, was an almost physical force. "What if I don't want you to control it?" she breathed. A low growl rumbled in his chest. It was not a human sound. It was the sound of the beast, the curse, straining at its leash. "Do not say that. You do not know what you are asking for." "I know that I dream of you," she said, her hands coming up to rest on his wrists, her warm skin against his cool. "I know that when you touch me, I feel like I've been lost my whole life and only just found my way home. I know that the thought of leaving this castle, of leaving you, feels like tearing my own soul in two." His control shattered. He crushed his mouth to hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming. A conflagration. It was centuries of loneliness and longing poured into a single, devastating connection. His lips were cool, but the passion behind them was an inferno. It tasted of frost and fire, of sorrow and desperate, clawing hope. Eva melted into him, her fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer, answering his hunger with her own. The world dissolved. There was no castle, no curse, no past or future. There was only his mouth on hers, his hands sliding from her face to her back, pressing her against the hard, unyielding strength of his body. She could feel the power coiled within him, a dormant volcano suddenly, violently awake. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing raggedly. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his body trembling with the aftershocks. "Eva," he groaned, her name a prayer and a curse. "What are you doing to me?" "Loving you," she whispered, "the truth of it is simple and as complex as the universe itself. In this life, as I did in the last." He pulled back, his expression tormented. "And what is the cost? To love me is to live in shadow. It is to watch everyone you ever knew wither and die. It is to become a predator. Is that the destiny you want? I want you, she said, her voice fierce with conviction. All of you. The man and the monster. The prince and the predator. My choice is you, Rael. It has always been you. She saw the war in his eyes, the desperate, lonely man who wanted to say yes, to seize this impossible second chance, and the noble, tortured soul who wanted to protect her from the horror of his existence. The decision was taken from them. A sound, faint but utterly foreign, echoed from the outer walls. A sharp, metallic clank, followed by the distant, agitated whinny of a horse. Rael went rigid. His head snapped up, his eyes narrowing, all traces of passion replaced by the sharp, cold focus of a hunter. He was listening to something she could not hear. What is it? Eva asked, a new kind of cold seeping into her veins. He released her, stepping back, his face a mask of grim foreboding. The moment of intimacy was shattered, replaced by a chilling reality. They've found us, he said, his voice like the edge of the sword lying forgotten on the floor. The hunters. They are here. The temptation was over. The time for choices was past. The fire they had just ignited was about to be tested by a storm of ash and flame. The shift in Rael was instantaneous and absolute. The man who had trembled with passion moments before was gone, replaced by the voivode, the warrior, the ancient predator whose territory was under threat. He moved to the window, a blur of motion, peering out into the swirling darkness. How many? Eva asked, her voice barely a whisper, the taste of his kiss still on her lips, now mingled with the metallic tang of fear. A dozen. Perhaps more, he said, his tone clipped and analytical. They are at the outer gate. They have brought rams. And fire. He turned from the window, his eyes meeting hers. The storm in them was no longer one of sorrow, but of a cold, calculated fury. They will not find entry easy. The castle's defenses are not entirely mortal. As if on cue, a deep, resonant groan echoed through the stone, a sound of ancient machinery stirring from its slumber. From her vantage point, Eva saw the massive, iron-banded outer gate begin to glow with a faint, sickly green light. A scream, abruptly cut off, pierced the night from beyond the walls. What was that? She gasped. The first line of defense, Rael replied, his face impassive. A little remnant of the Varkalak's magic. It feeds on hostile intent. He strode towards her, his movements efficient and purposeful. But it will not stop them all. They are prepared. They know what they are hunting. He took her arm, his grip firm but not painful, and guided her from the grand hall, back into the labyrinthine corridors of the inner keep. You will go to the lower vaults. There is a chamber, warded with symbols older than this castle. You will be safe there. No, Eva said, digging her heels in. The fear was a live wire in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a ferocious, protective instinct. I'm not hiding while you fight my battle. It is my battle, he snarled, spinning to face her, his composure cracking to reveal the raw terror beneath. It is the same battle, fought across centuries. They see you as a tool, a way to draw me out. They will use you to kill me, Eva, and then they will kill you for the sin of having been touched by me. I will not lose you again. Not like this. The sheer, desperate love in his words disarmed her more effectively than any command. He wasn't trying to be domineering, he was pleading. A thunderous boom shook the castle to its foundations. Dust rained down from the ceiling. They had breached the outer gate. "There's no time," Rael said, his voice tight. He pulled her into a crushing embrace, his lips against her hair. "Please. For me. Go to the vaults. The entrance is behind the tapestry of the dragon in the lower gallery. Promise me." Another boom, closer this time. The inner gate. Tears of frustration and fear welled in her eyes, but she nodded against his chest. "I promise." He kissed her, hard and quick, a seal on his desperation. Then he was gone, melting into the shadows of the corridor, heading towards the sound of the assault. Eva stood frozen for a moment, the echoes of the attack and the ghost of his kiss warring within her. Then, she turned and ran, not towards the safety of the vaults, but towards the library. She had a researcher's mind, and a lover's heart. Hiding was not an option. She burst into the library, her eyes scanning the shelves. She remembered a tome he had shown her, a bestiary of the Carpathians, detailing the weaknesses of mythical creatures. If these hunters were using the old ways, she would fight with knowledge. The sound of splintering wood and shouts echoed through the castle. They were inside. She found the heavy book, her hands trembling as she frantically flipped pages past illustrations of werewolves and forest spirits until she found it. The Strigoi. The entry confirmed what Rael had said: silver, sacred fire, decapitation. But there was a footnote, a scrawled annotation in an ancient hand she recognized as his. The bond of a true soul can be a shield or a weapon. A light in the darkness that can blind. A light in the darkness. Her gaze fell upon the massive candle on the mantelpiece, the one that had illuminated their first true conversation. It was still burning, a steady, defiant flame. Outside the library door, she heard the clash of steel, a guttural cry, and a snarl that was unmistakably Rael's. It was a sound of pure, feral violence. She grabbed the heavy iron candlestick, the hot wax searing her hand, but she barely felt the pain. She crept to the door and peered out. The scene in the corridor was a vision from hell. Two men in dark, practical clothing lay motionless on the floor, their throats torn out. A third was backing away, his face a mask of terror, as Rael advanced. Her immortal moved with a terrifying, beautiful grace, a whirlwind of death. He was a phantom, here one moment, there the next, his fingers tipped with claws that gleamed like obsidian. He was the monster from the stories, and he was magnificent. But then, from the shadows at the far end of the hall, another hunter emerged. This one was different. Older, with a face like weathered leather and eyes burning with a zealous fire. In his hands, he held a crossbow, its bolt gleaming with a silvery sheen in the torchlight. He took aim at Rael's exposed back. Eva didn't think. She acted. She threw the library door open wide, holding the massive candle high. "Stop," she screamed, her voice echoing in the stone space. The light, a sudden, blazing beacon in the dark corridor, flared. It was just a candle, but it was her light. And as the ancient text had hinted, for a creature so bound to shadow, the sudden, pure illumination from his bonded soul was a shock. Rael flinched, turning his head towards her, his eyes wide. The old hunter, momentarily distracted, hesitated. It was all the opening Rael needed. He spun, his movement a blur, and swatted the crossbow from the man's hands. The weapon clattered against the wall, the silver bolt skittering across the floor. But the distraction had cost him. The hunter he had been advancing on saw his chance. He lunged, a dagger made of the same silvery material in his hand, and plunged it deep into Rael's side. Rael roared, a sound of agony and rage that shook the very stones. He backhanded the man, sending him flying into a wall with a sickening crunch. But the damage was done. He staggered, his hand going to the hilt of the dagger protruding from his ribs. Black blood, thick and slow, welled around the wound. The silver was doing its work, neutralizing his healing, poisoning him from within. "Rael!" Eva cried, starting towards him. The old hunter, now unarmed but unwavering, looked from Rael, stumbling and wounded, to Eva, her face illuminated by her defiant flame. A cruel, understanding smile stretched his lips. "The mortal vessel," he hissed. "He has bonded with you. Then your death will be a wound from which he cannot recover." He drew a smaller, crueler-looking silver knife from his belt and started towards Eva. Rael tried to move, to intercept him, but his legs buckled. The poison was spreading, his immortal strength failing. "Eva, run," he gasped, his voice a ragged thread. Eva stood her ground, the candle held before her like a sword. She was terrified, but a strange, powerful calm settled over her. This was the choice. This was the cost. She would not run. She would not let him watch her die again. As the hunter lunged, a dark shape erupted from a side passage, slamming into the man with the force of a cannonball. It was not Rael. It was a massive, black wolf, its eyes burning with the same stormy gray as the man she loved. It was the beast, the primal, cursed part of him, unleashed and utterly savage. The hunter's scream was cut short. Eva watched, her heart in her throat, as the wolf, as Rael, tore the threat to her to pieces. It was brutal, visceral, and necessary. When it was done, the beast turned its bloody maw towards her. For a heart-stopping moment, she saw only the predator. Then, the ferocious intelligence in its eyes softened into a look of utter devotion. It whined softly, nudging the body of the hunter away from her, before its form seemed to dissolve into shadow, reforming as Rael collapsed on the floor. The dagger was still in his side. His breathing was shallow. The immediate threat was over. The castle fell silent once more, the only sounds the crackle of the distant fires the hunters had set and Rael's ragged breaths. Eva dropped the candle, the flame guttering and dying on the stone floor. She rushed to him, falling to her knees, cradling his head in her lap. "You promised," he whispered, his eyes clouded with pain. "You promised to go to the vaults." "I promised I wouldn't leave you," she corrected, her tears falling onto his pale face. She looked at the dagger, at the black poison creeping through the veins around the wound. His healing was not working. He was dying. The immortal, dying. The hunters were defeated, but they had won. They had forced the sacrifice. She looked at his beloved face, at the centuries of loneliness finally ending in her arms. And she knew, with a certainty that transcended thought, what she had to do. The cost of immortality was eternity alone. But the cost of love was everything. I'm not going to let you go, she whispered, bending low so her lips were close to his ear. Not this time. The silence in the aftermath of the battle was more terrible than the clash of steel had been. It was a silence of held breath, of a world waiting. The only sound was the ragged, wet pull of Rael's lungs, each one a little shallower than the last. The silver was a cold fire in his veins, a blight systematically shutting down the ancient, cursed magic that sustained him. Eva cradled his head in her lap, her tears falling onto his cooling skin. She stroked his hair, the raven's wing now dulled, and watched the light in his stormy eyes flicker like a guttering candle. This was the death he had craved for centuries, the release from his eternal prison. But to her, it was an unthinkable theft. It was the universe tearing her soul in two, again. Stay with me, she begged, her voice breaking. Rael, look at me. His gaze, hazy with pain, found hers. A ghost of a smile touched his bloodless lips. Do not grieve, my Eva. This is a mercy. You are my mercy. No, she said, her voice hardening with a resolve that felt as ancient as the stones around them. This was the choice. Not between damnation and redemption, but between a life without him and an eternity by his side. There was no choice at all. You asked me once if I was a miracle or a torture. I am your answer. Her mind was clear, her path illuminated as if by a lightning strike. The research, the dreams, the bond, it had all led here. To this moment, kneeling on cold stone, with the man she loved dying in her arms. Her blood held the key. He had said it himself. A mortal could be turned if the blood was given before the light faded entirely. But it was more than that. She understood now. It wasn't just about saving his life. It was about completing the bond they had forged in a past life, a bond that had defied death itself. It was about choosing him, wholly and eternally. You told me your blood is a poison, she whispered, leaning close so her lips brushed his cold ear. But you were wrong. It is a promise. And I am claiming it. His eyes widened, a flicker of panic cutting through the pain. No. Eva, you cannot, the cost. The cost is leaving you, she interrupted, her voice fierce with love. And that is a price I will not pay. Not again. With a trembling hand, she reached for the silver dagger still embedded in his side. The hilt was cold, humming with a malevolent energy that stung her palm. She wrapped her fingers around it. Our love was born in light and stolen by shadow, she said, her gaze locked with his. I am bringing it back into the light. Our light. With a sharp, sure motion, she pulled the dagger from his flesh. Rael cried out, a hoarse, torn sound, as a fresh wave of black blood welled from the wound. The poison was now free to flow, and his body convulsed. There was no time for hesitation. Eva didn't cut her wrist or her palm. She brought the tip of the silver blade to the soft skin over her own heart, a symbolic offering of everything she was. A sharp, burning pain, and then a single, perfect crimson drop welled up, stark against her skin. Then, she turned the dagger and did the same to him, pricking the skin over his still, cold heart. A bead of his dark, immortal blood appeared. My life for yours, she whispered, the words a vow that echoed through the silent corridors of time. My blood for yours. Now and forever. She leaned down and pressed her wound to his. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. A shockwave of pure, white energy erupted from them, silent and blinding. It was not the green, sickly magic of the Varkalak, but something purer, something born of sacrifice and in love that had waited centuries for its fulfillment. The wave washed through the castle, extinguishing the scattered fires the hunters had lit, cleansing the stone of the scent of blood and violence. In the courtyard, the dead fountain suddenly gurgled to life, clear water sparkling in the nascent dawn light that began to pierce the high windows. For Eva, the world dissolved into sensation. It was not pain, but a terrifying, glorious unraveling. She felt her mortality, a fragile, beautiful thing, being rewoven on a cosmic loom. She felt his essence, the cold, the strength, the ancient knowledge, the bottomless hunger, flowing into her, merging with her own warm, human soul. She saw their lives, his and Alina's, playing out not as memories, but as her own. The joy, the laughter, the searing pain of loss. She felt the weight of his centuries, and she welcomed it, because it was his. And she felt the bond, the fragile thread that had connected them across lifetimes, solidify into an unbreakable chain of starlight and soul, tethering them together for all eternity. When the light faded, Eva was still kneeling, cradling Rael's head. But he was no longer limp. His chest rose and fell in a deep, steady breath. The black poison was gone from his veins, the wound in his side nothing but a faint, silver scar. His eyes opened. They were no longer the eyes of a stormy twilight. The gray was still there, but it was lit from within by a warm, golden light. The agony of millennia was gone, replaced by a peace so profound it stole her breath. He was looking at her as if seeing the sun for the first time. He slowly sat up, his movements sure and strong again. He raised a hand, his fingers hovering near the small cut over her heart. It was already healed, leaving behind the same faint, silvery mark as his. Eva, he breathed, her name a benediction. He touched her cheek, and his skin was no longer cool. It was warm. Alive. What have you done? I made a choice, she said, her own voice resonating with a new, subtle power. She felt more. Her senses were heightened, the world a symphony of details she had never perceived. She could hear the water dancing in the fountain, the beat of a bird's wing miles away, and the strong, steady, synchronized rhythm of his heart beating in time with her own. I chose us. He stared at her, awe and a dawning, terrified joy transforming his face. The curse, the hunger. I can still feel it. But it's quiet. It's not a screaming void anymore. It's just a part of me. A part of us. He looked at his hands, then back at her, wonder in his eyes. You didn't just save me, Eva. You healed me. Not my body, but my soul. The first ray of the rising sun broke through the high, arched window at the end of the corridor. For 400 years, it had been his enemy, a signal to retreat into the shadows. He flinched instinctively, turning his face away. But no pain came. Slowly, hesitantly, he turned back. The golden light fell upon his face, illuminating his features, highlighting the flecks of silver in his hair. He was not burning. He was not in agony. He was bathed in warmth. A single, perfect tear traced a path down his cheek, catching the light. It was a tear not of sorrow, but of a release so long in coming it was almost unbearable. He looked at Eva, his equal, his savior, his eternal love. "You are the light," he whispered. "And you have brought me out of the darkness." He stood, pulling her to her feet with him. Hand in hand, they walked towards the sunrise, leaving the shadows of the corridor behind. They stepped out onto a high balcony, into the dawn of a new world. Below them, the mists of the Carpathians were burning away, revealing a landscape of breathtaking beauty. The castle of Castel Louis Dracul was no longer a place of sorrow and shadow, but a bastion of light, its dark stone gleaming, its towers piercing a sky of clearest blue. Rael drew her into his arms, his warm, solid body a testament to their shared victory. He kissed her then, not with the desperate hunger of the cursed, but with the deep, certain passion of the redeemed. It was a kiss that tasted of eternity, of mornings after long nights, of a love that had finally, truly, conquered death. They were no longer a monster and immortal. They were Rael and Eva. Two souls, bound by blood and light, forever. The curse was broken. Their eternity had just begun. And so, the bond was sealed not in shadow, but in starlight. Rael and Eva's story has found its echo in your imagination, but every story lives and breathes through those who hear it. If the echoes of Castel Louis Dracul lingered with you, if you felt the pull of a love stronger than death, then do not let the silence claim it. Your voice can be the light that keeps this story alive. Subscribe to this channel, so you never miss a journey into the heart of dark romance and forbidden destiny. Let me know that this story mattered. Leave a comment below, tell me which moment captured your soul. Was it the first touch in the grand hall? The confession in the library? The final, sacred choice? I read every one, and they are the magic that fuels the next tale. And if you would guide other listeners to this castle in the mist, please like this audiobook and share it. You become a part of this eternal bond, helping another soul find their way to a story where love is the ultimate power. Thank you for listening. Until the next forbidden world calls to us.